Hi, I'm Arthur Brooks. I'm a professor at the Harvard Business School and the Harvard Kennedy School, where I teach happiness. Usually when people ask what I teach and they hear that I teach at a business school, they assume that I'm teaching accounting or finance or supply chain management or something really practical like that. When I say I'm a happiness professor, they don't initially believe me. How could you be a teacher of feelings? People have asked me before. And that's a pretty good question. I want to talk about that a little bit because in truth, happiness is not feelings. It's something else. It's something more tangible. It's something that we can study scientifically. And with just a little bit of knowledge, all of us can actually get happier. That's my job in the next 20 minutes, is to help you get happier or to learn some of the skills and at least to maybe pique your interest in the science of human happiness, to which I've devoted my professional life. Now, when I said that happiness is not a feeling, what I mean by that is that if I asked you, what's your Thanksgiving dinner, you wouldn't say the smell of the turkey. You would know that the smell of the turkey means there is Thanksgiving dinner someplace, and that's the same thing with happiness. Happiness actually is scientifically something that we can separate into three parts. Just as food is protein and carbohydrates and fat, happiness actually has three different parts to it. It also has skills that we can acquire that make each part of happiness easier to attain, and most importantly, is something that we can share. Let me tell you a few facts about human happiness that might actually surprise you. Number one is, well, as I just told you, it's not a feeling. It's actually something that we can study scientifically. But number two is that it is a major area of study these days in both neuroscience and social science. My background is in economics, but I've studied a lot of social psychology as well. And I do a lot of mathematical modeling. I'm a very quantitative researcher, and I have found that studying the science of happiness is every bit as rigorous as anything else I have done in economics. Neuroscience is getting in on the act as well. We're doing a lot of neuroscientific testing that shows the parts of the brain that are implicated when we have happy, not just happy feelings, but when we're acting in ways that make other people happy, when we actually are satisfied with what we're doing, whether we're enjoying what we're doing, and whether we're finding meaning in different parts of our lives. The third fact about happiness that I want to share with you is that, this is the good news, you can get better at it. Some people think it just comes incidentally. There's a famous quote that's attributed to Nathaniel Hawthorne, the great American writer from the 19th century, where he said that happiness is like a butterfly. If you try to catch it, you probably won't, but if you sit quietly, it might just come and sit on your shoulder. You can get better at happiness, which is why I write books about happiness, such that people can learn the skills and get better at it. Now, how do you do that? The answer is that you need to learn the science, or at least learn the philosophy, or at very least, go sit with your grandmother and take careful notes. You need to learn the facts, then you need to practice the ideas in your life, and finally, you need to share them with others. So I'm going to give you some of that science here today. And finally, the last fact I want to share with you is that you can help other people to get happier. If you're a leader, if you're a manager, if you are supervising employees, or if you're a parent of children or active in your community, you can think of yourself as a happiness professor, just like me. And you will see that when you put some of these ideas into practice, teach them to others, they'll get happy as well. Okay, so let's get back to the business of what happiness actually is. I never quite defined it. I said it's not a feeling. So that's what it's not. So what is it? And the answer is, it's a three-part thing. I told you that food is made up of protein, carbohydrates, and fat, and those are the macronutrients. Well, the happiness macronutrients, the things that we need in both balance and abundance, that if we don't have them, we'll starve in terms of our happiness, are three things as well: enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose. I want to tell you about each one of these things now. Now, they might sound kind of self-evident, right? Enjoyment, what is it? Well, it's pleasure. Everybody knows what that is. It's stuff that feels good. Like in the 60s, they used to say, if it feels good, do it. Well, it turns out that enjoyment is both more satisfying than just pleasure and more complicated than just pleasure, and most importantly, something that you can manage a lot more than you can your pleasure. Now, indeed, there's lots of things that you can do to get pleasure. You can drink a little bit of grain alcohol. It'll give you pleasure, to be sure. Listen to, some music that you really like. Do something physically that really makes you feel good, to be sure. But that's actually not an input into happiness. Happiness is a little bit more complex than that. Happiness is pleasure plus elevation, plus thought. And here's why. Pleasure is something that involves the limbic system of the brain. The limbic system is your automatic processing unit for feelings and emotions. It's existed in its current form for more than 1 million years, and it was evolving over a 40 million year period. It's a pretty animal bundle of tissue. Almost all animals have a limbic system, just like we do, and it processes outside stimuli. The reason that we get pleasure automatically from certain things is because it's our brain's way of saying, this is a good thing, go get more of it. Now, in lots of cases, we're fooling our brains, like in the case of alcohol, for example. You're fooling your brain into thinking that something is really good for you when it probably really isn't, at least in excess it isn't. But that's what our limbic system is designed to do, to give us emotions that keep us alive, like fear and anger and sadness and disgust, but also joy and love and interest. Believe it or not, your limbic system processes when you're interested in something. And the reason is because your caveman ancestors, they needed to be interested in things so that they could progress and they could survive. All of those emotions are naturally evolved. Well, when they're limbic, they happen to you, and it's just good luck to have pleasure. But you can make it last. How? By moving it from the limbic system of your brain to your prefrontal cortex, to the big human parts of your brain that have only been evolved for the past 100,000 years. They make you a modern human. The way to make pleasure into enjoyment is to think about your pleasure, to contemplate it, to cultivate it, to go from just listening to a little bit of thumping, pounding music into music that you really like and learning about it, to go from a little bit of grain alcohol into fine wine and cultivating that. That's when enjoyment is something that you can enjoy over a long period of time. You can even remember it. The Thanksgiving turkey might give you pleasure because it fills your stomach, but Thanksgiving turkey with all of the people you love is a memory that you can savor, and that's enjoyment. The second macronutrient of happiness is satisfaction. Now, satisfaction is the reward for a job well done. It's the joy that you get from meeting a goal. Everybody wants satisfaction. They love it. And we always think, boy, if I really get these things that I want, then I'm going to be really happy. That's what my students certainly think, my MBA students at the Harvard Business School. And I ask them, what would actually make your happiness permanently higher? They say things like graduating from business school and getting the job that I want, getting the person I love to agree to marry me, having a family. These are the things that they think. And those things are very satisfying, but here's the catch. There's an old Rolling Stones song, you've all heard it. It's the third most popular rock and roll song of all time, called I Can't Get No Satisfaction. Mick Jagger sings that song because it speaks the real truth. Actually, you can get satisfaction. You have many times in your life. The problem is that you can't keep no satisfaction. The problem is that it's evanescent. It doesn't last. This is because of a phenomenon called homeostasis. That's kind of the word of the day. Homeostasis is the phenomenon in which something happens, but then you go back to your equilibrium. Your body and your brain make sure that you always go back to equilibrium, so you're ready for the next set of circumstances. But your brain lies to you and says, if you get that treat, if you get that cookie, if you hit the lever, if those things happen to you that you want, your success, your money, your power, your fame, your pleasure, if you get those things, then you'll permanently be satisfied. But it never works. You always go back to where you were, and you run and you run and you run. Satisfaction is a funny thing. It's part of happiness, but it doesn't last. And finally, the last part, and maybe the most paradoxical part of happiness, is purpose, also known as meaning. Now, why is that so paradoxical? The answer is because it requires unhappiness. One of the things I have to explain to my students is that if they're spending a lot of time trying to avoid suffering, they're probably making a mistake. Now, too much suffering is too much. If you're actually suffering from a mood disorder or clinical depression, that's a real medical problem. You have to have that treated. It's very important. But a little suffering, maybe a good deal of suffering, is kind of allotted to all of us. And here's the interesting thing. Studies show that when you ask people about their resiliency, about their source of strength, about the moment when they really understood who they were as people, they always talk about pain. They never say, you know, when I learned my mettle as a person, that week at the beach. No, they talk about failing out of college, or being broken up with by the love of their life, or bereavement, someone that they love getting sick or dying, or themselves getting sick or dying, or a bankruptcy at work. A lot of the things that we worry about so very much when they happen, it turns out that we learn a lot from those experiences. So here's the paradox of purpose. If we try to rule out unhappiness, if we try to avoid suffering, we'll probably avoid meaning. And in so doing, we'll lower our happiness. Getting rid of unhappiness makes you avoid happiness. It's one of the wonderful paradoxes of this beautiful thing that I get to study. So those are the three macronutrients of happiness. Now, you'll notice that we all have exposure to these three macronutrients, but we're all different levels of happiness. Why is that? Well, it's the same reason that some people get better nutrition or stronger than others, despite the fact that we have, even two people can have the same diet, because we process those macronutrients in food differently. The same thing is true for all of us. We find that there are three big ways that we process the elements: enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose of happiness in very different ways. We do this in three dimensions. The first is our genetic differences. The second is our circumstantial differences. And the last is our difference in our habits. Now, this is where this is going to start to get really, really practical. The part that I'm going to tell you about now, and basically until the end of our conversation today, this is the part where you might want to take notes, because this is the part that you're going to be able to walk away from and, starting today, learn some happiness habits. Now, the first big chunk of how people differ in their happiness is genetic. I don't want that to be true. I have always wanted in my life to be in control of all of my happiness, because I want to be in control of everything. Most Americans are that way, as a matter of fact. But I have to look at the facts, and I have to face the facts. And the facts in this matter, they come from studies of identical twins who were separated at birth, and they were adopted by separate families. This was a database of twins born between the mid-30s and the mid-1960s. It wasn't done for a social science experiment. When they reunited these twins, these identical twins, it was all voluntary, and it was beautiful and joyful. You can see some of these films on YouTube about these people learning for the first time at age 40 that they have an identical twin, and it's funny and it's very sweet. But it's also really interesting, because it turns out that when they were given personality tests, that between 40 and 80% of virtually every part of their personalities was genetic. And furthermore, they got more alike as they got older, not as since the time that they were younger, that their personalities kind of converge, and they converge to the personalities of their birth parents. Not completely. And there's a lot that we can do to alter these things, but it's about 50% of happiness. So your happiness is 50% explained if you don't do anything to fix your happiness, just your general normal state of happiness, how you feel on the average day when you wake up. You got that from your parents. So I guess you could say that literally your mother did make you unhappy, or happy, depending on, as we say in economics, your results may vary. Okay, now you might think to yourself, well, that's pretty depressing, 50% of my happiness, but it's really not. You notice that that's actually powerful, because to know your proclivities can help you understand when you need to use some switches. Now, what do I mean by that? One of the interesting findings about genetics and genetic personality differences is, for example, 60%, thereabouts, depending on the study, 60% of your tendency to become addicted to alcohol is genetic. If you have two parents who have alcohol use disorder, then you're in real danger for that. If you drink, you get my point, right? You have a genetic proclivity toward alcohol use disorder, but you have a ironclad switch. I have this brand new incredible technology where you can get around that genetic proclivity. It's called not drinking. And so it's 60% genetic, but it's also 100% behavioral, right? And there's a lot that we can do with our happiness as well. It's not a switch like not drinking, but there's plenty that we can do. So we got to keep the explanation going. Okay, 50% of your baseline happiness is genetic. That means there's the other half left. And half of the remaining half, obviously, I mean 25%, that's circumstances. That's the stuff that's going on in your life. Now, when I ask my students, once again, I mentioned that a minute ago, what would make you truly happy for the rest of your life? They talk about stuff happening to them. And I say, what would make you really unhappy? And they say bankruptcy and failing out of school, getting into an accident, getting sick, losing somebody I love, permanently unhappy. And I say, false. The data show that's not true. There's a world famous study from the 1970s that looked at lottery winners and paraplegics who had had a terrible accident and lost the use of their legs. They showed that those two groups, 6 months after the happening or the event, whether it was good or bad, that they were back to their old levels of happiness. Why? Because our happiness endures, and it's not just a product of our environment. So here's the case. At any particular time, 25% of your happiness or unhappiness will be circumstantial. but it won't last. That's related to that old satisfaction paradox. Remember, I can't keep no satisfaction. That's because circumstances don't last in your happiness equation. Last part, here's the good news. The really good news, the useful news for you today is the last 25% of your happiness, which is habits. You have 25% of your happiness under your direct control. And it really comes down to you doing 4 things every day. There's lots of little things to make you happier. There's lots of little things that can make you unhappier. But there's 4 big things that you need to think about. They're kind of like your 401k plan for happiness. These are the 4 things you need to do each day. The time and affection and energy you need to put into 4 accounts. Now, this comes from 10,000 academic journal papers about who the happiest people are and what they do. The habits of the happiest people. You don't have to read the 10,000 articles. I have, so you don't have to. I've boiled the ocean of that information down to these 4 accounts in your happiness equation. And they are your faith, your family, your friends, and your work. Now, let me explain very quickly, because this is not probably what you think. When I say your faith, that's a placeholder. That doesn't mean a traditional religious faith. It doesn't even mean my faith. It might not even be religion at all. You can be a complete secular humanist atheist. But if you have a sense of the transcendental, by which I mean something bigger than you get all the benefit if you pay attention to it and you cultivate it. So a spiritual life or a meditation practice or basic spirituality, a traditional religion for sure, or maybe studying the Stoics and the other philosophers, you choose. But you need every day to walk a transcendental path so you can zoom out from your everyday existence. You see, if you don't, you become obsessed, almost compulsive about paying attention to me, my job, my car, my money, my friends. It's just so boring. And yet you're obsessed with it, and it makes you crazy, a little bit crazy. You need to zoom out on the bigger picture, and the transcendental path brings you that. Second is your family. These are the ties that bind, that don't break, and that you wouldn't choose. And let's be honest, in a lot of cases, you wouldn't choose them, would you? You maybe had a tough Thanksgiving dinner where Aunt Marge or Uncle Jim just couldn't stop talking about politics. Well, guess what? If you create an estrangement, if you create a rift in your family because of something like politics, you're making a big mistake. Now, in many cases, you must. If there's abuse in your family, that's an absolute extenuating circumstance. But because of disagreements, people will often cut off ties with their families, and that's a big mistake for their happiness, and their family's happiness as well. Third is friendship. Now, this is really hard for a lot of you. You're strivers. You're really, really hard workers. And many of you have tons of people around you, but sometimes you think, this is leaving me a little cold. I feel a little empty. That's because your friends are deal friends, not real friends. My friends, there's a loneliness epidemic in this country because we have a lot of deal friendships and not very many real friendships. You don't need me to explain the difference between the two, but assess your friendships. Are they all deal friends that help you in your career and the things that you want? Or are they real friendships based on love and maybe even a little bit useless? Not worthless, useless. In other words, not so useful. Make a list of useless people that you love and enjoy. Those are your real friends. And finally, work. Look, this is a work-based environment. We're coalescing in this whole talk, and this whole set of talks, and this whole conference about work, aren't we? Work can be a source of great joy. You shouldn't over-index on it because most real strivers, they say, forget the faith and the family and friendship. I'm going to be all work. Well, that's no good. But work can bring you joy, but only when it has 2 things, and 2 things only. I don't care if you're a bus driver or an electrician, if you're a cybersecurity expert or a professor at Harvard University. I don't care. It has to have 2 characteristics. You have to earn your success, and you have to serve other people. Earning your success is your skills meeting your passions, the feeling like you're creating value and that you're being rewarded for your hard work and personal responsibility and merit and excellence. You got to feel that. You're not going to enjoy your work. But more importantly, you have to feel like you're serving somebody who needs you, somebody who needs what you do and can't do it themselves. Those are the 2 things that you need for yourself. And by the way, if you have people working for you, make sure that they feel that as well. So my friends, let's remember that this is your happiness portfolio. These are the things you need to pay attention to: your faith, your family, your friendships, and work where you earn your success and serve other people. So let me close by asking you a few simple questions. These are reflections I'd like you to absorb a little bit, think about. Ask yourself this: am I focusing on my pleasure or my enjoyment? Am I lifting my pleasure into enjoyment? That's the way to happiness. Second, are you managing your worldly wants, or are you kind of on a treadmill of trying to get satisfaction with the next thing, the next thing, the next thing? Are you understanding that it's hard to keep satisfaction? And if you don't understand that, is that maybe one of the reasons that you felt dissatisfied? Maybe you need to not have more. Maybe you need to want less. Third, how about your happiness habits? Are you tending to your happiness habits every day? Are you putting a deposit in your faith account, your family account, your friend account, and not just your work account? Now, second, based on that, what about your work? Does your work reflect earned success and service to other people? And furthermore, if you have people working for you, are you making it possible for them to earn their success and to serve others? Here's my last question. And what you do for a living, are you thinking about the happiness benefits correctly? Are you selling it to your clients in the right way? Are you trying to lift up your clients and bring them together? Are you using this information in your happiness journey? Are you able to maybe become a little bit of a happiness professor yourself? Well, if you do, it's good for the world and it's really good for you. I hope you've enjoyed this little round the horn. I teach whole classes on this. I write books on this. But I hope that just in the last 20 minutes, you've gotten a little bit of information. If you like, reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. And whatever you do, I hope that you share this with somebody else today and make them a little bit happier too. Thanks very much.